Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Supernatural Japan. My name is Kevin O'Shea, your host that brings all things spooky and mysterious from Japan to you. And you know what? I've been wanting to chat with content creators who are in the same genre, creating incredible paranormal, supernatural content from around the world. And this episode, it's an exciting one. I get to have a conversation with the great Jim Harold, the man who is a pioneer in paranormal podcasting, supernatural podcasting. He's created shows such as the Paranormal Podcast, Jim Harold's Campfire, and so many more. He took the time out of his incredibly busy schedule to sit down and talk with me here at Supernatural Japan all about his life in paranormal podcasting. Sit back and listen to my incredible conversation with Jim Harold. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming a true pioneer in paranormal podcasting. Jim Harold is best known as the host of the Paranormal Podcast and Jim Harold's Campfire, two of the most popular and long-running shows in the genre. For nearly 2 decades, Jim has been captivating listeners with chilling, true stories, thought-provoking interviews, and a deep curiosity about the unknown. His work has helped shape the modern landscape of supernatural storytelling and inspired countless fans and creators around the world, including myself. Whether it's ghost encounters, cryptids, UFOs, or strange coincidences, Jim has heard it all. And he's here with us today to share his journey, his insights, and maybe a spooky tale or two. Jim Harold, welcome to the Supernatural Japan podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for the invite. And it's cool, as long as I've been doing this, it's cool to think that people all the way across the world are aware of the shows and listen to them. So I really appreciate it. And it's an honor to be with you.
Yeah, I mean, as you can tell by my accent, I'm from North America. I am a Canadian, but I've been living in Asia now for 23 years. I actually started my first podcast back in the day of 2008, very short-lived. And those who are listening who know of me will know I had a show called the Just Japan podcast for many years. I started that in 2013, and that was kind of like a weekly podcast where I'd have different guests on. But I've been listening to you since I think maybe 2018 or so. Maybe I found the Paranormal Podcast. And then during the pandemic, 2020 is when I really kind of dug into paranormal podcasting and true crime stuff. And because at the time I was working, I was getting a paycheck, but I wasn't having to work too much. So luckily, I was an international educator, and I was only teaching online about an hour or two a day. And then I had these long stretches of day. I'm like, what am I going to do? I'd walk around and listen to podcasts. So first of all, congratulations. I want to say I wish you a happy birthday for the Campfire. 16 years.
See, today is 16 years. It is actually today, yeah.
Oh, wow. I knew it was coming up because last week when I listened to the Paranormal Report with you and Dar, you mentioned that the 16th anniversary was coming up, and that's fantastic. So congrats, 16 years. Wow. Yeah. So you are definitely one of the OG podcasters in the genre, and I think of almost all genres. I was wondering if you could let us know a little bit about how it all started. How did you get into this wacky thing called podcasting?
Well, it started about 20 years ago, actually. About this time of the year, I heard about this thing called podcasting, and I was listening to people like Leo Laporte and Adam Curry with his first podcast, Daily Source Code, which is really digging back. And this is when, this is slightly around the time or slightly before Apple added it to iTunes.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know. Maybe by this time they had 20 years ago. But I'm like, you know what? At that point, I was working in radio, but I was working behind the scenes. And I was always frustrated because I had gone to school to be a broadcaster and all this. And at that point, I'm in my 30s. I've got a wife, 2 kids. Still have the wife, still have the 2 kids. The kids are grown up now. But I couldn't really quit what I was doing and go to Paducah and become a reporter or, start from the ground up. That ship had sailed a long time before. But I thought, well, I could do this podcasting thing for fun. So that was around this time, roughly 20 years ago. And so I said, well, what am I going to podcast on? And I said, well, if I'm going to do this and I'm going to have any longevity, it has to be something I'm legitimately interested in. And since I was a little kid watching Leonard Nimoy on In Search Of, I was fascinated by the paranormal. And it kind of ran the whole gamut. UFOs, ghosts, all of it. It just all fascinated me. And I always had a feeling that there was more to life than, what we could just measure. I'm very pro-science. I think science is great. But I don't think science accounts for everything, at least the science of today. Maybe the science of 500 years from now might do a better job of it. So I thought, well, I'll start a paranormal podcast. So in July of 2005, I started a show called the Paranormal Podcast. And it was so early, I got the name The Paranormal Podcast. I'm like, surely somebody has this name. And I know the advice now is never put podcast in the title of your show, but at this point, I'm not going to change it. So as far as I know, that show is the longest running paranormal podcast on the internet. There were some before, there were some slightly after, but the ones before, I think all have gone away since. And so as far as I know, that show, the Paranormal Podcast, is the longest running paranormal podcast on the internet. And, there were like 5 or 6. There was an old thing called Podcast Alley. And when I went in, I saw a few paranormal podcasts. I'm like, how am I going to compete? And now there's like 20,000 paranormal podcasts.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot. I remember back in those days, it's funny you should mention Twit with Leo Laporte. This Week in Tech was one of the first shows I listened to. Yep. And then I remember coming across, not that long, Stuff You Should Know podcast. I think that was one of the original big ones. So how did you make that transition from being a podcast upstart, a hobbyist, to doing this for a living?
Well, it took 7 years. It was not an overnight thing. Basically the stages were from 2005 to 2008. I dabbled. I put out a show and I'd wait a few weeks and I'd put out another show. Okay. And people kept saying, give us more shows, give us more shows. And in my day job, which was basically, I was in the advertising side of radio, and I worked for I worked for CBS in a local market here in Cleveland for 4 stations. And my job was to encourage the salespeople to sell digital advertising before smartphones and before streaming became popular. So it was really a very hard sell to get them to say, hey, trade these radio dollars for these digital dimes, these internet dimes. But I did well in that job, but it was very frustrating. And then on the other hand, people were clamoring for more podcast content. In 2008, I told my wife, I said, you know what? I'm going to get super serious about this. I was actually listening to another podcast pioneer who is a greater pioneer than I am in my mind, definitely, is Dan Carlin from Hardcore History, who is dynamite and still doing it today. But he had a sponsor, Audible. And I thought, you know what? I am beating my head against the wall at this day job, and I'm going to continue to do the day job because I have to. And, I will do what I need to do. But, I really should focus on this podcasting more on the side because people are really clamoring for it. So I really got super serious in 2008. And started I said, I'm going to give it a few months, about 6 months, and I'm going to put out a show every week and be religious about it. And I did that. And then all of a sudden, about month 6, I got contacted out of the blue by an advertising group and said, we think Audible would want to sponsor your podcast. I'm like, ding, ding, ding. There is the sign from the universe. So from then on, I just kept ramping things up, started the Campfire in 2009, and it kept growing and growing. And finally in 2012, I said to my wife, I'm doing 2 full-time jobs. I can do one or the other. I can't do both. I'd like to give podcasting a shot. And so she was very nice and said, yeah, sure, give up your job with benefits and, a steady income and things. And talk about Bigfoot all day. But it worked. So far, it's worked. The thing is about this is you can never get secure. It's a very shifting industry. It's very changing. And I'd say the last couple of years have been more challenging than any other time in some ways. Okay. But so far, knock on wood, it's working. And, I hope to do this until I retire, which, I think we're looking 10, 15 years out if the health holds up. I'd like to do this for a long, long time to come, and very blessed to do it.
Fantastic. Wow. So, I mean, the Paranormal Podcast isn't the only show you do. And so I was wondering if you could just let us know about some of the other shows.
Yeah. I do a lot of shows, probably too many. So I do the Paranormal Podcast. I do Jim Harold's Campfire, which are the top two shows. And then I think the third most popular show, and it's really growing, is kind of like a 3.0 on the concept of the Paranormal Report. I did that in the early 2010s, did it with a couple of other co-host, and that's a weekly review of the news and so forth. And we even did that in video, which at the time was very uncommon. We did audio and video, and then stopped doing that. And I was doing some other podcasts with my wife, Dar Harold, and I thought we had a really good rapport, but none of the other ones caught. And I think it was more because of the concept of the shows, not because of our chemistry. Yeah. So I said, why don't I reboot the Paranormal Report, which is a daily recap or a weekly recap of paranormal news. And I did that. We did that, I think, last September or so, and it's going very well, and it's growing, and that's a lot of fun. So those are probably my main three. I produce a podcast for my daughter on Pleasant Dreams, where she reads public domain, Edgar Allan Poe, Lovecraft, all these kind of spooky stories. Then also I have a show called Jim Harold's Crime Scene, which is free. That one is not as popular, but the funny thing about that is I started that before Serial, before true crime podcasting got popular, but I made a crucial mistake, probably my biggest business mistake ever. I made it part of my Plus Club.
Okay.
So it didn't get widespread out there. But it's a show I enjoy doing. We're looking at maybe a rebrand of that, but it's great because I get to talk to a lot of true crime authors. I've had multiple Pulitzer Prize winners on the show. I've had multiple New York Times bestsellers on the show, and I think that's an underappreciated show that we do. So I'm looking at a rebrand and doing something different because I don't know that the branding matches what the show is, because it's not like he twisted the knife 27 times. It's like, a conversation with authors about their writing and about the cases and why people do these kind of things. So I think that's a show that could do much better if I did a better job at branding. So those are the free shows. And then I do a number of Plus shows for my Plus members: UFO Encounters, which is like Paranormal Podcast for UFOs; the Cryptid Report, which is like the Paranormal Podcast for cryptids; Ghost Insight, which is like the Paranormal Podcast for ghosts; Ancient Mysteries on the Air, which is just what it sounds like; and then The Other Side, which is more kind of metaphysical, almost new agey, even though I'm not really particularly new agey. I do like to talk to some of those folks. So I think altogether probably over 3,000 episodes. I know it's over 2,500 I produced, and there's some shows that we've since taken down and produced, but I'm pretty confident I've done over 3,000 episodes over the years.
Wow, that is amazing. That's why so many people refer to you as the hardest working man in podcasting. I think I've heard that. I was listening to an episode you did on the Paranormal Podcast with, and the name that's popping in my mind is Brendan Schexnayder from Southern Gothic.
Yeah, he's great.
And was it Brendan's Store? They've got a show.
Yeah, Fear Daily. Yeah, and they had
mentioned that in there, that you were like saying you guys are so hardworking. And they were like, no, you are, Jim, you are. So. Wow. I mean, that's amazing. All those different shows you do.
Yeah, and probably too many, to be honest with you. Sometimes, no, seriously. Oh, I forgot. I do Behind the Scenes with Dar as part of the Plus Club, where we talk about just stuff going on. And then I do a little re-release of some older Campfire stories that I do audio remastering on. That's in the Plus Club too. So it's nuts. It's probably way too many. I've made it more complicated than it needs to be, probably.
Well, so, I mean, your shows are covering a wide gamut of topics. I mean, everything from hauntings to possessions, cryptids, UFOs, UAPs, all these different kinds of things. So I'm just curious, what are some of the things out there, the spookier things in life that maybe you find the most plausible, and what are some of the things that you just can't really quite get behind?
Well, in terms of the plausible and probably my favorite subject is, and I've said this many times on the show, you've probably heard me say it, is the afterlife. Because we're not all going to see a Bigfoot. We're not all going to see a UFO. But we're all going to face that reality of physical death, even if you believe in an afterlife like I do. So when I have people who talk about near-death experiences and those types of things, those are some of my favorite subjects because it's one of those things where we're all going to experience it. There's a really old country song by Hank Williams, and it basically went something like this: no matter how I struggle and strive, I'll never get out of this world alive. And it's true. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
You can deny, it doesn't matter, the rich, the poor, everybody is going to face that at some point, hopefully many, many years from now. But it's all something, and it's the ultimate mystery. So that's my favorite subject. In terms of the things that I can get behind most of them. I definitely think there's something to the UFO phenomena. I mean, I do think sometimes it's people who are mistaken. Unfortunately, there are hoaxers sometimes.
Yeah.
I think probably the drone thing that happened on the East Coast of the U.S. this last few months, there were a lot of misidentifications, but wrapped in that, I think there was really something going on. And I think that's the case with the UFO question a lot. Maybe 90% of it is either military experiments, misidentification, well-meaning people, and then a few hoaxers mixed in. But there is something going on, and I think it's very real. Ghosts, I totally believe in that. Now, one thing that I know is that, I used to be very certain, ghosts are dead people, UFOs or space aliens, The thing is that I am just as convinced as ever these things exist, but I'm not always convinced that my prior assumptions of the explanations for those things hold up. So ghosts could be dead people. I do believe that we get communicated with by our loved ones sometimes, that they do reach out from the other side and somehow let us know that they're okay. But I also wonder how many ghosts are time slips, right? Are we getting a glimpse into the past? Those kind of things. So I think the explanations vary. The thing that's probably toughest for me, and it's not really, I'm saying that it's not the case, but the one thing that I always struggle with what side to point at here, but that guy right there, Bigfoot. That's one where I kind of vacillate between being a believer and maybe a little bit of a skeptic. Yeah. But I mean, if you look at the Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967 and you see that stabilized, when you saw the original, it's all herky-jerky. You're like, oh, that could be a guy in a suit. But when you see that stabilized and focused in, there seems to be muscle tone. I mean, you have, I'm sure some people make stuff up, but you've got people who have worked in the wilderness all their lives. You've got hunters who certainly know a bear and a deer from some kind of bipedal Bigfoot who say, hey, I saw something. So I hate to, going with the theme of the campfire, I hate to discount first-person experiencers. So even though probably the thing I'm most skeptical about is Bigfoot, I don't rule out the fact that it could exist, and I think it can exist. So I'm pretty much, I always say if I were a fuel gauge, I would be 3/4 full on the believer's side. That doesn't mean I believe every single thing, but I tend to skew towards believing.
Yeah. That's kind of something like with me, I suppose. I mean, I'm someone who loves great stories. I love storytelling. I love the storytelling tradition. I'm from the East Coast of Canada. I'm from Nova Scotia, where, there's an Irish, a Scottish kind of tradition of storytelling and music. And I think I grew up loving folklore. I loved reading Irish folklore and about the giants throwing rocks and, the large rocks are out of place in Ireland and Scotland, which are moved by glaciers, but those amazing stories and explanations. I've got some fun cryptid T-shirts and things, and sometimes my friends will see me wearing those. They're like, Kevin, do you believe in that stuff? I'm like, well, I don't know if I believe in this stuff here, but they're fun stories. Right. And maybe some things I do believe in. I love the way that a lot of towns in the United States, for example, really embrace cryptids and make festivals and make a big party of it. But definitely, I suppose if I didn't have, if I was a non-believer, I wouldn't have a podcast like I have, right? Because I wouldn't enjoy digging into the stories and right. And so how about yourself? Have you yourself had any kind of unexplained experiences that made you, because often, like for example, when I listen to the Astonishing Legends podcast, I love those guys. They're so amazing.
They're great. They do a fantastic job.
Yeah, they're so incredible. And then I listened to the episode where they did about the Sally House and the experiences there, where you basically essentially have a non-believer who, after whatever happened there, became a believer in something. And I say myself, I've had some interesting experiences maybe when I was a young adult that left me kind of scratching my head wondering what the heck was that. And I'm open-minded to things. I'm wondering, how about yourself?
Well, I tend to have more subtle kind of things happen. Probably one of the most noteworthy is it's not a traditional ghost story. Okay. It's more of what I call a head scratcher. Those are things that don't fall into a particular category, but kind of have you going, okay, what was that? So I'll explain to you what happened. Several years ago, I had been asked to be on kind of a unexplained mysteries, paranormal kind of cruise where I was one of the speakers. And it was Micah Hanks from the Debrief, who used to co-host the Paranormal Report with me. The late, great Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who was a prolific author on the supernatural, and I highly recommend her books, and so sorry we lost her. She was a great professional, great author, a great guest, and a great person too. And myself. So anyway, we were on this cruise and we had a sea day, where you don't dock anywhere, you're just on the sea. So that was the day we were going to do all our little paranormal presentations. And Micah and Rosemary had done theirs, and I was going to be up next, which was very tough to follow Rosemary because she was the best. So, but anyway, they had this little cafe, where you could get coffee. And I had a little bit of a cold and a little bit of a sore throat, unfortunately. So I thought, I'll run out to the cafe and get something before I have to, talk for 45 minutes. So anyway, to go to that cafe, you had to go through the ship's casino. And I saw one of the attendees that was in the meetings, one of the cruisers, playing this crane game where you have this claw that goes down and gets money in the casino. Mm-hmm. And I had a very intentional, vivid thought of my uncle who had passed a few years earlier. He was like a second dad to me. Mm-hmm. And I said, gosh, I wish he were here, because he loved going into down in the States, we get CVS and different stores, and they'll have these claws where you could get little stuffed toys. And he would spend, $10 trying to get one of these, and then he'd give them to neighborhood kids and things. It was but he loved those crane games. I'm like, and he loved low stakes gambling. Like he would buy lotto tickets or play the football pool or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. So, I had a very intentional thought of him, and man, I wish you were here, because it would take two of his favorite things and put them together. He would love this thing. So anyway, all of a sudden, this woman walks up next to the machine and cups her hand to her mouth and goes, John. That was the name of my uncle.
Oh.
And then all of a sudden her husband or whoever it was comes up and they talk, and that's it. Now, again, people would say, well, is that supernatural? I don't know. It's a heck of a coincidence to me. Yeah, it's
a weird coincidence.
To me, what I looked at it was, and I do believe this can happen sometimes. I think from wherever they are, our loved ones can sometimes move the puzzle pieces in a certain way to kind of acknowledge you. And I think that it was almost an instantaneous, hey, you're thinking about me and I haven't forgotten about you. And it was so identified with my uncle that we actually, one year, we bought him a little toy crane game, before all this obviously happened. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it was a very meaningful thing. Now, a lot of people would say, come on, Jim, that's just a coincidence. And maybe it is, but boy, what a coincidence. It could have been a million different names. It was John.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, it's not, I didn't go into a supernatural location and have a ghost chase me or anything.
Yeah.
But to me, it was extremely meaningful.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's when I had a brief storytelling podcast not that long ago that I did for a little while and stopped doing. And one of the things was I shared a story that I had where kind of the weirdest thing that happened to me, and it wasn't like I saw a ghost or I was in a haunted house. It was like literally, I had a very vivid dream one night. I was I think a university student. I was still living at home at the time, and I kind of, in the dream, I was in my father's office where I used to go and hang out sometimes when I was a little kid. He'd go there on the weekends to do some work, and he'd just tell my older brother and I to just kind of play and run around, and we'd just keep ourselves occupied for the hour or two while he was working. And I had this vivid view of a long hallway where my dad's office was at the very end of the hallway, and there was an office next to it, and it was dark, and there was the door next to my dad's office was open, and there was a light coming out. And I remember walking along down that hallway, and I looked into the office, and there was my father's friend who worked with him, who worked next to him, who was sitting in a chair alone with his hands and his face in his hands, and he looked up at me and he was crying. And then I woke up, and then the next morning, I'm having breakfast. I'm talking to my mom, and my mom says, "Oh, Kevin, I heard yesterday so-and-so's mother died." And she had mentioned that this man who worked with my dad, his mother had died the previous day.
Wow.
Or during that night or something. It was just like, what? And I was like, I had this dream last night,
Yeah.
That was...
No, we tap into things. I definitely think we tap into things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where I think that sometimes people have premonitions and those kind of things. I mean, I believe that there's something greater that we tap into.
You hear so many podcasts or just stories about like mothers, that kind of mothers feeling your intuition when a mother, for example, or a parent just knows something's wrong.
Well,
maybe the child lives on the other side of the country, but they know.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of a story of my grandmother, and this must have happened probably, I would guess, in the early 60s. My mom was still living at home, and one of her older brothers was still living at home as well, and he worked in the oil fields. And they didn't have, it was very backward. They didn't even have electricity, I don't think, until the early, like 1970 or something, where they lived. Oh, wow. Okay. So, but they didn't have phones or anything. And he had gone off to work in the oil fields. And my grandmother told my mom, she said, he's going to come back badly hurt or he's going to be killed today after he left. Sure enough, I don't know when it was. A few hours later, somebody shows up because they didn't have telephones and said, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know your son got hurt today. He's okay. He's going to leave, but he broke his pelvis."
Oh, wow.
How did she know that?
Yeah, right.
How did she know that? She tapped into something, and it's kind of the way that I think about our brains and how our brains work. I'm dating myself here, but my first computer, I got it in the early 90s. And I remember when I got it, it came like, this is when it comes in a big box, and, it's got like Quicken and all these different little programs. And I loaded it with the programs. Oh, this is cool to play around with, whatever. And then when it really got life, though, is that when I hooked a telephone line to it, and there was something called Prodigy, which was like an early precursor of the internet. And once you tapped into that greater consciousness, it got a whole different dimension. And that's what I think our brains are like. I think that our brains are both, in a way, a container, because that's the way I think, the materialists think about it, is that everything is in here and that's it. But I also think that it is a transmitter and a receiver too. So I think that our brains have, things that we learn over the years and patterns that we develop and pathways that are made. That's all obviously a real thing. But there's also something that maybe science doesn't understand, where we are both a transmitter and a receiver to some kind of consciousness. And I think all of that can be true at the same time.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's, again, that's, I think, maybe part of those little kind of head scratchers that you talk about.
Yeah.
And, have already, you've listed off a lot of different shows that you make. The Campfire, for example, is a show where you talk to a lot of different people who have a lot of different stories. First of all, so I'm curious, on average, how many interviews do you think you do in a week?
Probably between Campfire calls and actually interviews, it's probably in the range of 15.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It might be some weeks a little more, some weeks a little less. Like earlier in the year, I got way ahead on interviews for the various shows. But for example, on just this last week, I had literally, let's see here, I'll just tell you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. The last 2 days I had 15 Campfire calls. Wow. And then I've got a couple interviews tomorrow. So usually the Campfire is around 10 calls per show because it's a 90-minute show. So I always try to do a little bit more. That way we build up a stockpile of stories. And another thing that's happening with the Campfire that we're doing, I've been playing around with video for a while. Starting on tomorrow's episode, we'll have audio as always, but we're going to add a really full motion video. On YouTube, I've always had just like a static image or an image of a fire, and that doesn't really work well on YouTube. So we're going to start, having a shot like we have right now, and then when the callers are comfortable with it, it's optional. They don't have to, but if they want to show their video, they can come in and talk as well. And that'll be a new dimension, because I always believe in doing different things. But like I said, I've been doing some form of video since about 2010. But really audio, most people listen. That's really, let's put it this way, if I had to make a living on video, it probably wouldn't work out so well. The vast majority of people just enjoy listening. And maybe it's my face for radio that I have. So,
well, you've talked to so many people, you've heard so many stories. I'm wondering, and this is probably going to be a tough question because you've interviewed so many people, but who are some of the real standout interviews for you, or who are the people that you really fanboyed out over when you're just like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking to this person?
Yeah. Well, I think my number one was not even the paranormal. For a short while, I did a TV podcast, and I got to interview Ed Asner.
Oh, wow.
Of the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Yeah.
And the best, and again, he may have said this to all the hosts, but he's like, you're a hell of a host. And I'm like, wow, now that's a compliment. That's a compliment. And the guy who has won more Emmys than anybody in U.S. TV history. So that was quite a compliment. So I really loved doing that show. I would talk to a lot of the old time TV stars. But again, as you know, some of these things catch, some of them don't. That one didn't seem to, although I was surprised with the kind of people I was getting. Yeah. But in terms of the paranormal and the supernatural world, Jacques Vallée, UFO legend, who basically, if you see Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the one character is based on him, and really one of the greatest thinkers. Also in the UFO field, Stanton Friedman, who basically broke
Canadian.
The Roswell story. Yeah, Canadian, absolutely. And in fact, a very kind of strange story about him is the American radio show Coast to Coast AM, they George Norrie, the host, periodically has live events around the country. And they had one in Columbus, Ohio, which is about an hour and a half south of me. And Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who I had mentioned before, was not able to be at one of these because she was ill at the time. This was when she was sick, unfortunately. And they called me up. I've been on that show quite a few times as a guest and said, would you mind filling in? And I'm like, no, I can't replace Rosemary, but I'll be there. Well, the other person on the panel was Stanton Friedman, who I'd interviewed a few times, maybe 2 or 3 times, but he didn't remember me because he's, so many people. So anyway, the weird thing that happened was, I thought, oh, this will be great. And, I'll give him some space. I don't want to be a stalker, but we talked backstage for well over an hour. And I was just picking his brain about different stuff. And it's like, man, this guy is one of the all-time great UFO experts. Yeah. And in a few months, I'll contact him and we'll do an interview and he'll actually know who I am. So unfortunately, en route back to his home, he passed at the Toronto airport. I was shocked. utterly shocked. But he was a great guest. And I was literally probably one of the last people to talk UFOs with him. That was a sad thing. Very ironic, very sad. Other people, I'm trying to think. Brad Steiger, who may not be as well known these days, but he wrote probably more paranormal books than anybody in history, and was doing so up until the 2010s. I got to interview him a number of times. I've been very lucky to have some great people on the shows. And, Eric von Däniken, Chariot of the Gods, and the guy who kind of invented this idea of ancient astronauts. And I just saw where he's turning 90. I don't think he's in the best health. I got to interview him, which was a big thrill because, whether you buy into that theory of ancient aliens and all that, he's the guy who created it, and started. So I kind of steered towards, and I have interviewed a lot of people from the paranormal TV shows and those people, but honestly, I kind of gravitate, I guess I'm an old soul, I gravitate to the long-term legends, the people who've been around doing it for decades. Not that I don't, I'm privileged to interview some of those people in the paranormal TV shows and things, but really the ones that resonate with me who people have been doing it for decades.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. Wow, neat. You've met some legends, absolutely. That is so cool. So I don't want to keep you too much longer. You've got a lot on your plate. I'm curious to know if you could just let the amazing folks from the Supernatural Japan podcast know what are some of the things you're cooking these days. What are some things that are be coming up that people should look forward to, and where can people find you online?
Well, they can find me at jimharold.com. They can find me at youtube.com/jimharold, on Spotify, Apple Podcast, all of those places. Probably the most exciting thing that we have going now is I'm going to be starting a new paranormal community, and it'll be absolutely free. See, on Facebook, we have our virtual Campfire group, and we have 26,000 plus people in that group. Yeah. And it's a very active group, and we've done a great job of having great mods, so we don't have a lot of spam and that kind of stuff, which is very unusual for a group that size. But it's become increasingly frustrating to me that, I will post something and maybe 1,000 people will see it. Somebody else will post something, hey, I came on the show and we talked about this and here's a picture. And then 500 people will see it because everything on social media is geared towards profits and towards the algorithm and those. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I built this community of over almost 27,000 people, and we can't have our discussions because you're showing me AI garbage. Yeah. So basically what I'm doing is and the name and everything is under wraps for now, but within the next few weeks, we're going to roll out a new paranormal community. It'll be absolutely free. Okay. And it'll be a great place for the listeners to talk about all the different subjects on the shows or things that aren't on the shows, as long as they pertain to the paranormal. No politics, please. Yeah. And I think that's going to be fun. That's the thing I'm probably most excited about right now, because I think, social media was great when it first started. It was a great community, and now it's kind of been bastardized a little bit, I think, a lot. And it becomes more about, not about your community, but about whatever they want to push that can make
these are the same gripes I've been having recently on my own Facebook page. It's not to the scale of yours, but I've got about 3,500 followers. And when I look at the analytics, I put out a post and it reaches 46 people. 50 on average, about 50 people out of 3,500 will see something that I post, which is just insanely ridiculous.
Right, exactly. Especially when these are not people that you forced into it. It's people who say, hey, I want to know what this person is saying. And it's not just about me. I only probably contribute in that group about 5% of the content. Most of it is from our listeners. Hey, I heard this story. Something like this happened to me. And then they have a discussion, and they're great discussions, but nobody's seeing those discussions. So we want to change that. So I'm excited about that. That should be a lot of fun.
So we just have to go to jimharold.com and
all the details will be there. Details will be there. Yes.
Fantastic. And you've got a great newsletter as well, which I'm subscribed to.
Yeah. We have a weekly newsletter, and since we do so much, and it's easy to miss, you can subscribe to it right at jimharold.com. And that basically is a little column from me at the beginning, and then a little blurb about each episode released that week. So you're like, oh, I missed that one. I'll check that out. Or you say, oh, that one's not my cup of tea. I can skip that one. It kind of helps people be selective consumers of the content.
Fantastic. Wow. Well, there you go, folks. Go to jimharold.com. Go subscribe to all these different shows. If you like the spooky, you like the paranormal, well, you're listening to this show. You probably do. There's a lot more paranormal and spooky stuff right over there. A lot more. Jim, thank you so much for coming on the Supernatural Japan podcast. It's been fantastic to finally get to meet you and to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it for giving me the honor of being with you and your great audience. And as I always say on the show, stay spooky.
Well, I want to thank Jim for taking the time to come on Supernatural Japan. I hope you all enjoyed that incredible conversation. Wow, I was so excited. I was a bit starstruck to talk to Jim. He is such a fantastic guy. And I've been listening to his podcast for so many years, and he is actually part of the inspiration behind Supernatural Japan, one of the reasons why I began this podcast. Thank you so much. Please go to jimharold.com, jimharold.com. The link will be below in the show notes. And please see all of the incredible things that he is doing over in his world. And thank you so much for listening to the Supernatural Japan podcast. Please leave a review wherever you listen to the podcast. Please share this podcast with one of your friends. That's how we can grow. I would really, really appreciate it. You can follow the Supernatural Japan podcast over on social media. Definitely go check us out on Instagram at Supernatural Japan. You can follow me on Blue Sky, hanging in there on X a little bit longer just because there are so many incredible people who are based in Japan I've built a network with. But mostly follow me on Blue Sky at Mad for Maple. And of course, there's a Facebook page. The link will be below. And you can always email the podcast at supernaturaljapan@gmail.com. Come and follow the socials, please. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to Supernatural Japan. I really appreciate it. My name's Kevin O'Shea. I am your host. And we'll be back next week with another incredible story about something very spooky in Japan.